these two trees right here that you see coming up, the ones that are really slanted are the ones that are elms, and they actually have Dutch elm disease with the emerald ash borer. So as we look at this, you can follow these trees up and you can see all of the branches that have no leaves on them. And so what that indicates is that the crown is dying back. And so because of that, there could be multiple reasons as to why it could be happening. And so we generally think about, is it under stress? What kind of stress? Is it drought oriented, soil compaction, verticillium? There's a couple of different things that could be occurring. But what we really want to look at are the signs and the symptoms of what's occurring with the tree, so that those different trees. So if we see two or more, it can help us to determine what it might be. So I tried to do a closer up of this particular tree here. You can notice where my mouse is, the pointer, that there's different colorations all the way going up the tree there. And here it is, that other one that is leaning, and some of the different coloration that's happening there. And so I do know that we're losing the top growth of that. So I have identified that it is an ash tree. So what we need to look at are some of the different signs. We talk about signs and symptoms. And I always talk about signs and symptoms about like having strep throat, for example. If I have a symptom of a sore throat and a fever, those are symptoms. But when I go to the doctor and they do a throat culture and they look at it underneath the microscope, they can actually see that it's strep throat, and that's going to be the sign. So when looking at this, we want to look for signs to verify if it's going to be an emerald ash borer. And so this picture here, we look at the different bugs that are green. So we have to make sure we look to see it. The emerald ash borer is only about a half an inch long, and it's very metallic green in its appearance. It has more or less like a bullet shape to it. It also is rounded, but then also has a very flat side to it. And that's really important to know and to understand, because when we look at the bark of the tree, we will actually see holes that are in a D shape. So the top part of the body will be rounded and the bottom part of it is going to be flat. And so when it burrows out of the tree, it kind of has a D shape to it. And you can see how small that is compared to a penny. And then here's another look at it. And the D can actually, the straight line could be in any direction within that hole that comes out of the bark. And sometimes the straight line on that may not be as straight as what we might like for it to be as a solid straight line, could be a little bit more rounded. Also notice with this, the cracking of the bark that's right here as well. And that's an important symptom that we want to look at. So we've looked at the adult. So let's look at the larva. The larva is creamy in color and it's kind of bell-shaped in its segments. It does not have any legs. The other thing that we can look for if we don't see the larva is if we pull the bark off in some way, we'll see these kind of S-shaped trails or burrows, which is what this larva will do in making these different lines. And notice the size again, according to the penny. And again, here's another good indicator of when you take the bark off, you can see those S. And then you can actually see the D-shaped hole right here when it actually metamorphosizes from the larva to the adult. And so let's look at what some of those symptoms are. So we have the crown dieback, as I showed with the two trees that are at my mom's place. We also can see the epicormic growth, and that's where the tree trunk is trying to produce more branches. Generally, these are going to be seen below where the larvae are actually feeding. Then we can look for bark split. And bark split happens around the holes where the adult emerges out. And because all of the trails or the tunnels underneath where the larvae are really digging into that area within the tree, and it actually is splitting that bark across. Then we can also look at woodpecker feeding. And I showed you on that page that was kind of blurry a little bit of how the coloration of the bark of that tree was totally different. So the woodpeckers can sense that the larvae are inside the tree. And so what they'll do is they'll come and land on that tree, and then they'll flick off that bark to get underneath the bark so that they can actually feed on the larva. So these are some of the different symptoms that we can look for. This is where the emerald ash borer is located across the state. Notice this is from October of 21, so it's pretty recent. There's only a few counties where we don't have this insect in the state. So the question really was, are all ash varieties going to be susceptible to emerald ash borer? And essentially, if you look up under USDA APHIS, most all of them are going to be susceptible in some fashion. Ashes are part of the Oleaceae family. It's the olive family. So the green ash we generally see in urban settings. The white ash is also around, and that is equally affected. There is a such thing as a blue ash. There's only about 2% in our state of blue ashes. They're really an ornamental type of a tree, and they're only in very specific locations that require limestone hillsides, and they have a high pH that they really like to see. Then we also have the pumpkin ash, and that one is also susceptible. So these are the ones that are predominantly in our state. There are up to about 16 different ashes across the US, and all of them are susceptible. Then we also have the fringe tree that belongs to the same family. It is not an ash, but it is also susceptible. Believe it or not, there is a tree out there that's called the mountain ash. It is not a true ash. It actually belongs to the rose family, and it is not susceptible to the emerald ash borer. So I put down a note here because as I've been talking with different folks about how to handle what's going on with my mom's trees that are there, that if they do fall, they're going to cause damage to her house there. And what they say is because of all the burrowing of the larva, the inside of that tree is kind of like a styrofoam cup. If you just give it a little bit pressure, that cup just kind of falls apart and cracks a whole lot. It easily falls apart. So the styrofoam cup, once it is in, it actually occurs once the dead, it decays really, really fast. A lot of times we will have branches that fall out of trees, but with this particular issue, what happens is the branch all the way back to where it attaches to the trunk actually is where it really can fall. And so it can be kind of dangerous if it's near buildings, houses, fences. And so you really want to pay attention to those ash trees that are out there if they do have the emerald ash borer.